Some fights start with a gunshot. Others begin with a lawsuit. Mine. It started with the snap of a tackle box closing on a misty morning. The day Margaret Wyndham called the sheriff on me for trespassing in my own fishing spot. She didn't just stir up neighborhood drama. She signed her own eviction notice without even realizing it. Picture this. Dawn breaking over Pine Ridge Lake. Mist lifting off the surface like ghosts stretching awake. The water dark and glassy, loons calling across the stillness. For 23 years, this had been my sanctuary. The place I went not just to fish, but to heal. And there I was, casting my line from the same worn patch of shoreline ID stood on since 1999 when suddenly a voice like nails on a chalkboard cut through the peace. You're trespassing on HOA waters? The sheriff's deputy showed up 10 minutes later. Deputy Charlie Morrison, local boy, good man. But he looked about as comfortable as a preacher in a casino when he stepped out of that cruiser. Sorry, Theo, he said, tugging at his hat brim. But she filed a complaint. I have to ask you to leave. Behind him, standing on her deck in pastel pink like a self-appointed queen, was Margaret Wyndham. Her arms crossed, her smirk smug, watching me pack up my tackle box as though she'd just defeated me in battle. But what Margaret didn't know what would eventually bring her whole empire of laminated signs and phony rules crashing down was simple. I didn't just have permission to fish that lake, I owned it. Every last drop. And for months, she'd have been illegally charging my neighbor's $200 a month to use my lake, my property, as if she were the gatekeeper of some private country club. That morning, as the tackle box snapped shut, I made myself a promise. It was time to show this newcomer that not every fishing hole is easy to net. Some bite back. But before I tell you how it all unraveled, I want you to think, what would you do if some self-appointed HOA tyrant tried to steal your fishing spot? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I guarantee you've got HOA horror stories of your own. My name's Theo Blackstone, and this is the story of how one Karen tried to steal Pine Ridge Lake, and how she ended up tangling with the one man she never should have crossed. I moved to Pine Ridge Lake in 1999 after cancer took my wife Sarah, 48 years old, too young, too sudden. I needed space to breathe, to rebuild the pieces of a life I wasn't ready to lose. What I found was a 2-acre slice of heaven, left to me in my grandfather's estate. Back then it was just raw land, nothing but trees, undergrowth, and the gentle lapping of lake water against the rocks. I built the cabin myself, board by board, nail by nail. Every plank driven into place was therapy. Every blister was proof I could still create something when everything else had been taken from me. And the lake. Oh, the lake. Every dawn for 23 years I'd walk down to that water, boots crunching gravel, the air smelling of pine needles, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of morning dew. I'd cast my line into the dark water while the mist curled like smoke, and for a few quiet hours the world was bearable. Fishing wasn't just a pastime, it was communion with memory. It was where I still talked to Sarah. Pine Ridge Lake itself is no small pond. 40 acres spring-fed, clear as glass in summer, rimmed with a patchwork of cabins old and new. For years, it was a blue-collar refuge. Retired teachers, veterans, factory hands, living modestly but proud. We borrowed tools, shared the catch of the day, kept an eye on each other's places when someone was out of town. Nobody cared if your truck had rust or your yard looked like a wildflower meadow. We belonged. That was before 2015, when the McMansions started sprouting like weeds. And with them came the outsiders. And then came Margaret. 6 months before the fishing incident, Margaret Wyndham blew into Pine Ridge like a summer storm, loud, flashy, and determined to rearrange everything in her path. She pulled up in a gleaming white BMW SUV, vanity plate and all. Freshly divorced, freshly cashed out with nearly $1 million settlement, and freshly determined to turn this lakeside community into her personal kingdom. She was 48, though her helmet hair could have been preserved in amber since the 80s, and always dressed like she was headed to a corporate boardroom, not stepping onto pine needles by a lake. Turns out she was a boardroom veteran, a former compliance officer from Atlanta, which explained why every word out of her mouth sounded like a hostile takeover. Within 2 weeks of moving in, she'd called the first concerned homeowners meeting. I walked in out of curiosity and nearly walked out from secondhand embarrassment. She had actual PowerPoint slides, charts, buzzwords like optimizing community assets and managing recreational liability. She pitched an HOA as if it were the cure for cancer. Make no mistake, Margaret wasn't just organizing bake sales. She was targeting the soul of our community. Fishing restrictions, dock permits, lawn standards that would make a golf course blush, and the crown jewel of her empire, declaring the lake itself a common area. That meant $200 per household every month. Just for the privilege of dipping your line into the water or stepping into a canoe. 8 of the 23 property owners signed up, mostly the new money crowd who cared more about Zillow than neighbors. The rest of us. We got certified letters demanding we enroll in her HOA, I called her, polite as Sunday manners. Ma'am, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'm not interested in joining. Her response could have frozen the lake in July. It's not optional, Mr. Blackstone. This affects everyone's investment. My home isn't an investment, I told her. It's a life. Click. And that's when the signs started popping up. Plastic laminated eyesores on posts around the lake. Private HOA property, members only. But I kept fishing. This wasn't just a hobby. This was my life. And no laminated plastic or smug Atlanta transplant was going to rob me of it. Margaret, though? She'd made it personal. When she called the sheriff that morning, she thought she'd won. She had no idea she'd just picked a fight with the man who owned the very ground beneath her BMW tires.